Guess what? It's time for another episode of the Daily Good News. There's a lot of good things happening in this world, and you're not going to find out about it on mainstream media, but LovEvolution is here to let you know. What's up, everybody? It's your girl Jessica, aka J Hart, and I'm your host of the Daily Good News. Now, of course, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can get notified anytime a new episode drops. And as always, let's take a moment to do a little vibe check. Vibe check. 1, 2, 1, 2. How you doing? How you feeling? Take a moment to be present and take a deep breath in. 2 days ago, it was Juneteenth. Now, I know a lot of people do not understand the historical significance of Juneteenth, what it means, so let me give you a little quick history. Juneteenth is a symbolization of resilience and independence. On January 1st, 1863, all enslaved people in Confederate states were declared legally free at midnight. Across the South, Union soldiers marched onto plantations, reading small copies of the Emancipation Proclamation, spreading the message of freedom. Now, despite the Emancipation Proclamation being made effective in 1863, certain places were still under Confederate control. Unfortunately, in those places, it could not be implemented. The westernmost part of Texas was one of those places. So on June 19, 1865, around 2,000 Union troops arrived in Galveston Bay, Texas. In this area, there were over 250,000 black people still enslaved. Now, at the time of their arrival, the Army announced that every black person enslaved was declared free. June 19, 1865 was 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. The newly freed people started calling this day Juneteenth. Now, Juneteenth has always been the United States' second Independence Day. Unfortunately, many non-black people still do not know the historical significance of this day. Juneteenth symbolizes resilience and hope. It symbolizes the strength of a people to never give up on freedom. Juneteenth has historically been a day to celebrate. It again is the United States' second Independence Day. Unfortunately, many across the country don't know about this holiday, but that is starting to change. A lot of states are actually making some positive reform when it comes to celebrating Juneteenth. Now, although Juneteenth is not a federal holiday, the conversation around the historical significance and importance of this day has just been heating up, especially this last week. So we are starting to see more states and companies recognize and honor this special day. So, because this is a good news show, I'm going to share some good news around Juneteenth that happened in this past week. In Texas, it has been designated an official government holiday just last week. In Virginia, the governor announced that he will propose legislation to make Juneteenth an official state holiday. In New York, Governor Cuomo signed an executive order making Juneteenth a paid holiday for state workers. He also said that he will submit legislation to make it a permanent holiday starting next year. Now, in New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio announced that it is an official city holiday and school holiday starting 2021. After Governor Cuomo signed his executive order making it a paid holiday, the governor of Pennsylvania did the same thing. In Oregon, the governor, Kate Brown, announced that she will push to have it become an official state holiday starting next year. Now, there is still, a lot of change that needs to happen in terms of recognizing Juneteenth as an official holiday, but that is something to celebrate. We got Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, Oregon, and Texas recognizing the historical significance and importance of Juneteenth and why it needs to be a holiday and why we should celebrate this special day. Aside from states recognizing Juneteenth as an official holiday, there are some companies across the U.S. that have done the same. Lyft has made Juneteenth a company holiday. The New York Times made it a paid holiday this year. Nike made it a paid holiday. Postmates declared it a permanent company holiday. Twitter and Square also declared it a permanent company holiday. In Target, employees that were working on Juneteenth got time and a half, and then eligible employees were able to take off the full day with full pay. Target's corporate headquarters were closed in honor of Juneteenth. Vox Media recognizes Juneteenth now as a company holiday, and they have also launched a fellowship program focused on HBCUs and the National Association of Black Journalists. And then lastly, Visco has started recognizing Juneteenth as a company holiday. Now there are a lot of other companies that came out and released statements recognizing Juneteenth but have yet to acknowledge that it will be a paid company holiday. Hopefully next year we'll see even more change happening across companies and states in the US. Our next good news story of the day, I want to talk about Google and their new commitment to racial equity. Now CEO Sundar Pichai, I hope I said his name correctly, released a new blog post detailing the company's commitment to racial equity. In his note to the company, the CEO outlined a 5-step plan that includes a set of concrete commitments to move forward. The company announced their plans to improve Black representation at senior levels. Their goal is to improve leadership representation of underrepresented groups by 30% by the year 2025. Secondly, the company plans to address representation challenges and focus on hiring, retention, and promotion at all levels. They also plan to create a stronger sense of inclusion with more inclusive practices and policies. They will establish anti-racism educational programs. And then lastly, focus on supporting the mental and physical health, as well as the overall well-being of the Black community. Aside from that, the company is also working on adding a Black-owned business option to Google profiles, which would be an opt-in feature that's going to roll out within the next few weeks. They also plan on creating more economic opportunity, which involves over $175 million economic opportunity package to support Black business owners, startup founders, job seekers, and developers, in addition to YouTube's $100 million fund to amplify Black creators and artists. Now, this includes $50 million in financing and grants for small businesses specifically focused on the Black community, $100 million in funding participation in Black-led capital firms, startups, and organizations that support Black entrepreneurs, $10 million to help improve the Black community's access to education, equipment, and economic opportunities in their developer ecosystem. And then lastly, $15 million in training through partners like the National Urban League to help Black job seekers grow their skills. The company also plans to increase investments in Atlanta, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and London. Google CEO also commits to close to $3 million to help close the racial equity gaps that exist in computer science education, as well as increasing Black representation in STEM fields. So Google is making some major investments in racial equity. You know, Google's a huge company. They definitely have a lot of income and can do so. So it's really amazing to see such a big company taking such a strong stance towards fighting racial injustice and helping with solutions to build racial equity. For our next news story, I want to talk about some police reform happening in the city of San Francisco. Now, in a previous episode last week, I discussed police reform happening across the US. Right now, the topic of police reform is really hot. You know, everybody's talking about it. We're talking about police, holding police accountable, and just police reform in general is a topic of conversation that we are starting to hear more and more, and I don't see it stopping anytime soon, especially considering that peaceful protests are still happening across the US. So in San Francisco, the mayor London Breed announced a new roadmap for police reforms. In her new roadmap, the mayor outlined 4 priorities to help with police reform. They are as follows. Priority number 1 is to demilitarize police. That means getting rid of military-grade weapons used against unarmed civilians. This includes tear gas, bayonets, or tanks. These will be banned by the end of 2021. The second step in her roadmap is to end the use of police as a response to non-criminal activity. Now, non-criminal calls are those like neighbor disputes, reports on homeless people, or any mental health calls. Instead of having police respond, the city of San Francisco will have trained unarmed professionals answer those calls. Third, they plan to address police bias and strengthen accountability. And then lastly, they will be redirecting funding for racial equity. Now this means divesting money from law enforcement to instead support intentional investment of funds in programs and organizations that serve communities that have been systematically harmed by past city policies. So San Francisco is definitely taking a stance when it comes to police reform. More importantly, when it comes to non-criminal activity, it is definitely important to have trained professionals that can de-escalate situations rather than a police officer that's just going to only escalate the problem. So it's really amazing to see and exciting to see this happening. For our next news story, I want to talk about Malala. You may recognize her as the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner ever. You may remember her story. About 8 years ago, she was shot by the Taliban for basically speaking up and saying that girls have a right to education. Now, 8 years later, Malala has graduated from Oxford University. That's an amazing accomplishment, something to celebrate. Congratulations to Malala on her new graduation. For our next news story, I want to head over to Ithaca, a city in upstate New York that has now become the first U.S. city to submit legislation that would cancel rent. Now, due to COVID, 2/3 of Ithaca have been affected and are having difficulty pay their rent. The city has submitted legislation that still needs to pass the State Department of Health. If it's passed, Ithaca would become the first U.S. city to cancel rent during COVID-19. For our next news story, I want to head over to the Bay Area, where the oldest black bookstore has seen a huge rise in sales. Now again, race discussions are at an all-time high right now, and people want to be more educated on racial inequalities, racial injustices. People just want to get educated on it. And as a result, a bookstore in Oakland, which happens to be the oldest black-owned bookstore in the U.S., it's called Marcus Books, they have seen a huge rise in sales as more people educate themselves on the race issues in the U.S. That's something to celebrate. If you live in Oakland or in the Bay Area, check out this bookstore. It's called Marcus Books. They have a lot of literature on race issues in the U.S. That was today's episode of Daily Good News. If you enjoyed it, comment below. Let me know what was your favorite story from today's episode. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button so you get notified anytime a new episode drops. And then make sure you hit share this with your friends, with your family members, and let them know about the good news happening around the world every single day. If you want to read more good news, head over to LovEvolution.media. I'm your host, Jessica, aka J Hart, and I'll see you guys later. That's a wrap.